there, this is Zowie from Systematic Mastery, and today I'm going to walk you through how to use the newly released Readwise plugin for Obsidian. As you may know, I'm a Readwise user and a heavy Obsidian user. We've released a couple of videos on both of those tools in the past. But now with a new plugin that is out, I wanted to walk you through how you can use Readwise and Obsidian specifically together and how it can help you basically retain information, but also use it actively when you make notes or you create new ideas that you yourself put in Obsidian. Now, we all know that making notes from books is very, very useful to do. It will help you remember what you read, it will help you create new ideas, and later, ideally, help you link these ideas to others. Imagine a year after you've read a book and you still come back to those ideas when you're reading something completely different. You'll be able to generate new ideas because you can go through time combining all the ideas that you've had and collected. Now, Obsidian is something that allows you to collect all that information. However, when we read, we do it online, we do it on Kindle, we listen to podcasts, and what Readwise really does is solve the problem of how to get all of that information that you want to retain while going through podcasts and books and articles, and put that into one tool that will then automatically, in this case, sync with Obsidian. I'm really happy with the plugin and everything that Readwise has offered me. My past has been making notes in notebooks, trying to always take them with me and then losing the notebooks, obviously, or later having to go through all the notes that I made in my notebook and then putting them in my digital knowledge management system. And I've also made a lot of notes in margins. So every now and then when I pick up an old book, I'll still find notes that I made in margins that are actually really valuable to me, but would cost so much time to integrate into my digital note-taking system. And Readwise really kind of makes this whole process obsolete. You can read digitally, that's the only prerequisite. You have to start reading digitally. But from that point on, everything that you read, more or less, and also podcasts even, yes, podcasts that are transcribed automatically can be synced to Readwise. That means that you can make highlights of what people say in a particular podcast. And I'm going to go through how that works very briefly in this episode. And, well, let's get to it.
All right, there we are. This is the overview page of the new plugin. As you can see, it's all made for automatically exporting your highlights to Obsidian. It's a plugin that was released a few days ago. Later in this video, I'm going to walk through how to set it up specifically, but now I'm just going to highlight kind of some of the features that it has. First, let's start with what you actually see in Obsidian when you use the plugin, and that is this. This is a book I can recommend, actually. It's a nice book. Daniel Coyle wrote it, Little Book of Talent. And as you can see, I made quite some highlights here. And this is the way it's currently synced over to my second brain. The cool thing here is that this is something that recently added also to the API of Readwise, is that the tags that you add to a particular highlight will also be synced here. And that means that when you open your graph view, you'll actually be able to see all the highlights attached to this, right? So for example, now I'm looking for tags mastery. And this is what makes it quite interesting, because now I can find literally every highlight that I've ever tagged mastery very easily throughout my whole second brain. And you can see that I also have other notes that have mastery in there. So this will allow you to basically start integrating the search through your second brain, including your Readwise highlights. Now, the second part is the Obsidian export. And this is one of the kind of main valuable parts of this plugin, because there's a couple of community plugins out there, but the official plugin is very well integrated with Readwise itself, mainly in the templating options you have. I haven't customized this a lot because I feel that the templates as they are now are actually quite fine. What I'm hoping for eventually is to have every single highlight in one file. So that means that one highlight will be one file. Currently, as you could see in Obsidian, all the highlights are added to one file right now. So that means that one book is one file and all the highlights for that book are in that particular file. This works very well. On the other hand, I feel that linking notes is very effective, and therefore I would like to see something like that. My current usage is, as I said, very standard, but this really allows for a lot of customization. I changed a few things. So whenever one book is synced onto Obsidian, it will add in the header of that file document tags, right? So document tags, as the template says, is added here. And then I will have topics that are added after this. And for me, this is very useful because these are links to notes. And I will have one note about this topic that is then linked to, in this case, all the books that have that particular tag. Then those topics I link to my domain roots, and that gives me a nice navigatable structure for my graph view. I really am slowly discovering some of the powers that you can kind of unleash with a properly navigatable graph view, but it takes a lot of work. I'm still working on this, and I'm planning to release a video of that in the future. So this is a good example of what you could do with a templating option here. There's a few other options that I'll go through when we actually set up the plugin in more detail, but these were the main highlights I wanted to give you. I'll go through some of the extra options here when I actually show you how to set up the complete plugin. Another thing that's worth highlighting is the filtering option. So basically what this allows you to do is decide what books or articles or whatever you might or might not want to sync over to Obsidian. There could be some information that you just don't want to have in your Obsidian, and this allows you to make sure that that doesn't end up there. For example, maybe you don't want to have tweets in there, or there's some other source that you have a lot of highlights for that you save for a particular reason and you just don't want to have in there. I personally choose to sync everything because I'm very happy to have everything in my second brain, also because it's a way for me to own all my information. But I'd say this is a very, very useful feature, and this really shows already what the power is that the Readwise Obsidian integration uncovers. And I feel that a lot more of the kind of integrations power will come to shine in the future as Readwise adds more features to the sync plugin. Now let's go on to how to set up the plugin from scratch. All right, let's install some plugins. There we go. We're going to open settings, going to community plugins, then we're going to do some browsing. And then we will select Readwise Official. I have used Community. As you can see, it's installed. I really liked it. I actually submitted a piece of code there to change it a little bit. I'm really happy with it. The Official plugin, however, has slightly more features, so I'm assuming that it will be used a little bit more. There we go. It's installed. Let's enable it. Close this. Now when we scroll down, we'll see Readwise Official here. As you can see, it's not connected yet, so I'm going to do that. Connect. There we go. Looks like we're connected. Perfect. Let's go back to Obsidian. And indeed, Obsidian confirms that we're connected. We have our settings here. Now, initiating sync. This is obviously the master feature of the plugin. I'm not going to use it just yet. The formatting options I'll go through in a bit. Then the base folder should be set to whatever you want it to be, of course. In my case, I want it to be resources, then reading and listening, and then Readwise. And if you want to know why I have this particular structure, I recommend you check out one of our other Obsidian walkthroughs. The link is shown right now. That will include a walkthrough basically of why I have a particular folder structure in my second brain and how I set it up and what it all means. The resync frequency, let's set that to 24 hours. That should be enough. I do make highlights, say, maybe almost every day, so this should be decent. I don't want to trigger resyncs too often because it will load the Readwise server, so be a little bit considerate with this, I guess. So syncing automatically when Obsidian opens is certainly something I like. You know, it's just another thing to kind of make sure that your highlights are all in sync. The resync deleted files is a very interesting and handy feature. Whenever you sync highlights for a particular book and you actually make some changes in that note, because those notes are then yours once they're in Obsidian, you might want to recreate all the highlights in that particular file, and that's something you can achieve with this feature. So then you can delete the file that the plugin created while syncing, and then when you initiate a resync, it will actually recreate the file that initially you deleted. If you disable this and you delete a file, then it will not recreate the file. So that means that you can, basically delete things from your second brain and not let them then show up again. Of course, you can achieve something similar with the filtering setting in Readwise itself. So there's kind of two ways to attack that. All right, so we're basically set up. The next step will be the formatting, and then after that, we'll actually do the real sync. It's going to be a big moment, guys. So let's look at the formatting. So as you already know from an earlier part of this video, I don't have like a lot of customizations here right now. I think there's a couple of things that you can do to make it slightly more effective, say. One of the things is author. I would like to say if author, then I want to have this as a prefix, because this will make sure that my note is kind of actually identifying what it's about. I use a lot of the quick search in Obsidian, and basically this allows me to be slightly more efficient there. Then another thing I've done, it's actually here, is that I have the topic prefix. So I showed that also in the beginning of this video. It will add the document tag. So if you don't have this prefix, it will show up as just the actual tag. In my case, I like to add topic in front of it, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Highlights header. I'm happy with the highlights header. I like it. Let's keep it like this. All good. So one thing I did see is that here we have a date, which will be rendered here. What I like to do is to make sure that where I have dates, things are linked to my daily notes. That allows me to navigate those things quite effectively in my second brain. Now, it does actually introduce some difficulties here and there, because you'll have a lot of daily notes, but you'll also have a lot of things linked to those daily notes. And sometimes people ask me like, well, why are you doing that? Doesn't it make it harder to search? And yes, initially it did, but you can filter those out in graph view. So that means that in the graph view, you won't be forced to also navigate through all your daily notes and everything. On the other hand, what you can do is when you have local graphs, you can basically go through your own history of how your thought process went, right? So I tend to do a few synthesizing sessions a week, but also I'll do some walks, and then I'll make highlights, and I'll read in my Kindle and whatnot. And then I personally like to know when certain thoughts or certain kind of information came through me, and also what kind of patterns I've had in terms of how I navigated my information. So this to me gives kind of a nice bit of context to how I collect my information. So I will make it a link like this. So from now on, every single time this is rendered, it will actually include a link to my daily note. Now, this is basically everything that I change to the formatting. As you can see, there's good instructions here. You can go pretty crazy. So I'm not going to change a lot more to the formatting. Basically, I'm not going to change anything anymore. I think this is enough. It's important to mention, though, that this might be quite technical. I think you can just stick to the basics of what Readwise offers. Yeah, there is some complexities maybe in trying to format this, and maybe the syntax here, like the way this text is structured, is a little bit daunting. But you can play around with it, and the cool thing is that they did add the preview here, so you can just play around and you don't have to be afraid that you break anything, especially if you turn off the sync in Obsidian itself, then you won't suddenly have very strange things showing up there. I suggest to just, if you don't feel comfortable, to just keep it like this, and you can make some small changes as you go. If you have any questions and you might want to get this syntax from me because it feels a little bit daunting to do it yourself, let me know, and I'm happy to share that in our own Obsidian second brain. Our own Obsidian second brain is something that we are slowly working on. We are going to include some of the knowledge that we base also our podcast episodes on, but also some personal research that I do. And I'm going to keep publishing it every now and then here in the Systematic Mastery second brain. So it's a part of my own second brain that I explicitly publish. It might offer some interesting insights also as a context for some of the episodes we have. For example, we did one on flow. I made a note on disorder in consciousness. It might be interesting to read through those things. At some point, we do want to include like all the links, because there's a lot of links to other books and stuff. That will take a while because there's also private information in there. And I didn't actually start using my second brain with the idea that this would happen. So you can see here, there's a lot of links, but these links are actually dead. So we'll fix that. Please keep an eye on this. And I think it's going to get a lot more interesting now that the Readwise plugin is here. So now that we've done the templating, I think another important thing to highlight is the filtering. Let's see. Well, we have disorganized attachment. This is something that might be very private to me. It's absolutely not to me, but maybe there's other people that can read my second brain. Well, this will actually make sure that this is not synced to Obsidian. So let's turn it on again. Because I actually do want to have it in. But this is a very useful feature, I think. In the past, the other plugins I used obviously just synced everything. And this definitely adds to that. So as a final note, we just went through the custom formatting. There's one other feature, and I'll show you what that actually does in a bit, because we'll have to trigger the sync for that. Let's go and sync our highlights. Let's initiate the sync and see what we end up with. So the sync is completed. The reason the sync is already completed is because I already synced everything. So in this case, it only took few seconds. When you have a lot of highlights, it will definitely take a while. I think for me, it took around 30 seconds the first time, or maybe even longer, maybe closer to a minute actually. But from that point on, it will take very little time. Now, let's go to our actual structure. This is what I meant with the structure of grouping things. So as you remember, we're talking about the grouping files in the category folders. In this case, all your highlights will be synced to particular category folders. And this is one other very, very nice thing I want to highlight here. Pun intended, we're talking about highlights, and I'm going to highlight this thing talking about highlights, is podcasts. I mentioned it also in the intro. You can actually highlight podcasts. This is one of the power features I want to walk you through. This was basically the setup of the Obsidian plugin. Now I'm going to walk you through how I actually use my Readwise highlights in my second brain on particular phases in your life where you might want to learn something about a particular topic. Maybe you have exams or you're studying for a certain thing. You can use Readwise very effectively to basically increase the frequency of particular highlights. I'm going to walk you through that in a little bit. Also, I make notes of audiobooks that I consume. Now, that's not something that you can do through Readwise just yet, probably because Audible doesn't offer it. I use Audible. I think if they would offer it, Readwise would certainly work on that. It's very impressive how fast they try to look for sources of interesting information that people use and then integrate that into the product. However, you can make manual notes while listening to an audiobook. I do think it's a very, very handy practice. Every now and then you'll be the annoying person standing in the middle of the sidewalk making a note, but I think that's a worthy price to pay for being able to retain information effectively. Let's get to it. Let's go to the power usage, guys. There's a couple of other use cases for Readwise in Obsidian. However, they'll all be notes, right? That's the only thing you can really do with Obsidian. So what I think is a more interesting perspective is to show you how I think you can use Readwise in smart ways to optimize some of the things that you might want to achieve with knowledge organization and personal knowledge management, basically. In most of the cases, I feel that it's really up to you to decide how you want to use your highlights. As long as you know the wiki links structure and the way you can set them up and use them effectively in your second brain, I feel that it's way more effective to kind of play around with it and see wherever you want to make links. So I'm not going to go through something as obvious as that. What I will do, however, is start with a small and simple note. So let's start making a note and using our highlights. We're going to make a new note. Ignore the pop-up here. This is something I configured in my Obsidian to make it slightly easier for myself to create notes. I'm going to make this productivity and the brain. I know it's a very generic note. And when trying to be productive, you should consider how your nervous system operates. Huberman. How your brain works and changes. So let's say we want to link something here, and let's say motivation, changing your brain. That seems very relevant. In this podcast episode, Huberman, extremely interesting podcast. He mentioned that neuroplasticity is something that after the age of 25 generally is quite heavily lowered. And before that age, we have a lot more neuroplasticity to go on. There are a couple of tactics and strategies that he explains there as well on how to learn effectively, even though your neuroplasticity, which is basically the kind of relative ability for your central nervous system to be able to adapt to impulses. So that could be information, but it could also be other physical skills, right? That ability is diminished as we get older. And in this case, you would want to have some strategies to deal with that. And there certainly are some interesting and funny ones as well. So recommend you to listen to this episode. It's called Changing Your Brain. You'll definitely be able to find it on YouTube. Now, this is a good example of how you could use your highlights, right? Like I've listened to a podcast and turned out that there was a very interesting part of that. I actually highlighted this from the podcast itself, and I'll show you in a bit how that's done, and ended up being able to use it in something that will then teach me how I can use my own brain better, or my central nervous system in this case. So this is kind of a good highlight this pun was absolutely not intended, a good highlight of how these highlights are extremely useful to incorporate into your second brain. Now, let's walk through how, or at least the tool you can use to highlight podcasts. The tool I'm talking about is Airr. Highlight and share the best moments from podcasts. It does exactly what it says it does. You can install this app, unfortunately, only on your iPhone. As you can see, there is an Android waitlist. So if you're an Android user, I would suggest to join the waitlist. The app itself, in terms of quality, is good enough. There are some quirks, but looking at what they're building and how much it is upgrading my kind of information digestion workflow, for me, it's absolutely worth it to sometimes have it crash. It's not often, by the way. I would say the quality is definitely proper, but keep in mind that this is a very young product, and also this whole concept is pretty new. So I expect this industry to grow definitely a lot, and especially considering second brain and all this personal knowledge management getting more and more attention. So I would kind of invest in this early. It's an extremely useful thing to do. Not all of the podcasts are transcribed. Unfortunately, there's a few kind of less popular podcasts that I personally also listen to, like Epicenter, for example. Those will not be transcribed, but Huberman is definitely the Tim Ferriss Show. The big podcasts you can assume are transcribed. So really good experience. Also, when you have something like a headphone, you'll be walking outside. You can actually use the interface in your headphones. For example, I have a Sony, and I can basically swipe on my headphone to take a highlight. And that's a pretty cool experience to walk through the park, listen to an interesting bit in a podcast, swipe your headphone, and know that it is using transcribed text from that podcast, syncing it to your Readwise, and then whenever you open your laptop, it will sync automatically to your Obsidian second brain, and you'll be able to use that particular bit of the podcast in a note that you're taking. And I think this is a really good highlight, again, pun not intended, a really good example of how Airr and Readwise in general is capable of upgrading the way you consume information. And I personally feel that this is something that will become more prevalent as we all, in the information age that we are in, become more dependent on managing information properly, because the amount of information is increasing exponentially. We're all part of that wave, right? Okay, so check out Airr. Let's move on to the next part of this short walkthrough. All right. If you're a very astute observer, you might notice that I've taken off my glasses. I wear them most of the time when I'm behind my computer. I want to walk you through how I use tags in Readwise and how I use tags in Obsidian. And now that the official Readwise plugin is out, you can actually have the tags that you put in Readwise also be synced to your Obsidian second brain. This was not possible with the previous plugin that I used. And the powerful part of this is that if you have a tagging system that is more or less the same between Obsidian and Readwise, that means that now that this plugin is there, you'll be able to use these tags very effectively to link this information. What I want to walk you through is the way I use particular tags, now that they are the same in Readwise and Obsidian, if you have a tagging system that is more or less equivalent across these two tools. The way you can use Obsidian, having all your highlights in here and having the tags be similar, is that you can go into a session of thinking and perhaps not start with a lot of inspiration, which I think is very, very normal. I try to just focus on sitting down and starting and nothing else besides that. So you don't need to have a plan as long as you just get started. Now, getting started is one thing. It's also quite nice to have some inspiration to help get you started once you've actually decided to sit down. And I'm going to walk you through how I do this using tags that I have set in Readwise and now also use in Obsidian. Now you can see here that the mastery tag is blue. So we're focusing on the mastery tag. There's also a few Zettelkasten nodes. And this is a really good example of how I immediately was able to gain value from setting up the Readwise plugin. Because the blue ones are ones that are from Readwise. As you can see, this is an article. This is a book. This is another article. This is a book. So these blue ones, they're all from Readwise. And then we have the yellow ones. These are Zettelkasten notes. So I write a little bit about the self, discipline as a lever for meaning, autonomy is fluid, all these things. Okay, so the cool thing here is that these are already linked to each other. And that is very, very, very nice. So I've actually linked from some of these notes to the highlights. So there's already been some work going on there. So imagine you want to go through the concept of mastery. I feel that the concept of mastery is a very, very broad topic. I think discipline equals freedom is something that's really cool for mastery. So discipline equals freedom is actually something I consumed as an audiobook. This book I then marked in Goodreads. Now imagine I am going to write about mastery, and I want to just think about this, and maybe I want to publish something on my blog, or I write something to myself. And in this case, I'll have some associations for the note. Naturally, I'm going to tag this mastery as well. It's going to show up in the graph view. Point. There we go. I'd say, okay, so we're going to make a note here. Mastery is the ability to fluidly pass through life, leaving it better than you found it. Something along these lines. And then it's not easy. And I want to link to there we go. And now, there we go. So this is something I'll add there. So to remind me that this is not easy. Obviously, we can go a lot further, right? So we can say, oh, we're going to close this. We're looking for some more inspiration. Oh, we have the Almanac of Navarre Ravikant, extremely good book. All right, so there we go. I'm going to write a little bit more. So you have to imagine that I'm writing this note, right? And I realize while writing that these are concepts that I've touched upon before. You could also just use the graph view as inspiration. There's a lot of ways in which you can organize the way you write your notes. And I think it's really important not to structure it too much. It's a very intuitive and inspiration-full process, ideally. You should be very thoughtful. So this is a nice note to go through a topic that is important to me, that I want to remind myself of certain things, and also to keep kind of diving in further, right? Because you once read this book, The Almanac, and you want to read Discipline Equals Freedom, and then it's nice. And now that you have all the highlights, you can actually make that a recurring theme in the way you set up your own maybe life philosophies or a business plan. So if you have difficult or big things to think about, using highlights is a really nice way to incorporate reflections of your own personality, maybe your own past personality and realizations as such, into your thinking process. And I feel that Second Brain, specifically Obsidian in this case, is a great tool to use as a thinking aid. You can use it for knowledge organization only. You can use it for research only, which is pretty close to using it as a thinking tool. But I really feel that also for the more, say, philosophical aspects of life, it's a very, very good system to use to spur your own thinking and to kind of go into a pretty decent flow of reflection. And naturally, ideally, this is combined with reflections without books and without making notes, like just pure thinking. But I found that it has a profound impact on my life and the quality of my life. So this is something I wanted to incorporate here simply because I feel that it could be useful. If not, I'm happy to hear it, and then we'll not talk about that anymore. So this is the way I like to incorporate other notes and Readwise highlights into my thinking using Obsidian. All right, so the last thing I want to do is just walk you through some of the features of Readwise. We already have a walkthrough of how I personally use Readwise. That one is very much on how I use it. We haven't really made an overview of what Readwise really offers. So I'm going to take the chance to walk you through what Readwise does, to give you an idea of how you could use it and inspire you to start practicing. Naturally, if you're inspired, then I would recommend you to check out the video that we have created. In that video, I'm going through how I integrate it with Instapaper and all kinds of other tools that allow me to use it effectively. As you know, Readwise allows you to sync highlights from tools like Kindle, but also podcasts like from Airr, and also from articles. In my other video, I'm going through how to set up these tools. Part of the real value of Readwise is that it shows you a daily review. It's of course something that you have to pick up yourself. In my last video, I had a streak of 61 days, meaning that I did my review 61 days in a row. I'm now at 27 because I missed a few days. I'm going to try and get that streak higher again. So there's a game element to it. It's really honestly a lot of fun to do. Your daily review contains highlights that you have actually configured to be there. So you can say, I want to have a particular amount of highlights and I want to have a particular recency in highlights. That means that the more recently you've made that highlight, the likelihood that it will show up is higher. And if it's been a very long time ago, then it's less likely to show up. This is a nice way to make sure that if you are reading a lot and you want to retain the information you read a lot, then I would say optimize for high recency, because that basically means that if you read a book last week, then there's a high chance you'll get a highlight from that book, say this week. And that's an advantage, of course, when you want to retain information, because it repeats quite often. That's a good way to retain it. Now, there's other stuff you can do here as well. Bonus highlights are very nice. That means that you'll get some extra highlights from books that you might like. It's very, very cool. Then you have frequency tuning. This is very handy. So there's a few books that I'm particularly interested in. Overcoming Gravity, I have quite some highlights on, so I want to get that a lot, because one of my personal goals is to learn a planche, which is related to body weight exercises. So in this case, I'm thinking, yeah, that's extremely relevant. So I'm going to set it to as many as possible. That means that the chance is very, very high that I'll get a highlight from this book in my daily review. Now, you can customize this as much as you want. You can even filter on articles, podcasts that you've listened to, etc. I definitely recommend configuring this every now and then so that you'll be able to get the most from the actual review that you do every day. Now, when we look at all the highlight categories, it's quite important to note that you have books and supplemental books. And this is also one of the real valuable things about Readwise, is that, I'll show you, if you connect your Readwise to Goodreads, in that case, it will keep track of everything that you've read in Goodreads. So Goodreads is an app that allows you to keep track of what you read. So whenever you finish a book, you can mark it as read in Goodreads. And if you've synced this, Readwise will know which books you've read. But also, if that was an audiobook, of course, you haven't made any highlights, right? So in this case, the supplemental books will allow you to get highlights that other people made from books that you might not have made highlights for yourself. This is extremely handy because there's many cases where people make quite some good highlights. And I, for example, made notes of the audiobook that I read, and I can combine these things later in Obsidian. I mentioned this also in an earlier bit of this video. Then there's articles. This is just browsing the web. I use Instapaper for this and Memex. I go through those two tools in the other video. Link is currently shown. Tweets, obviously, very handy. Readwise, you might have seen it in threads. It's actually quite interesting to see how often it's been used. In a lot of the Twitter threads I go through, I see at least once a mention of Readwise. The feature here is that on a tweet, you can comment at Readwise.io save, and then Readwise, if you linked your Twitter to Readwise, will save that whole Twitter thread into your Readwise, and then this will also be synced to Obsidian. Podcast I already went through. You can do that with Airr. I hope there's going to be more tools added to that. I've been using it for a while. I've used it on and off, and I'm definitely back at it now, especially since I'm listening to podcasts that are properly transcribed in Airr. All right, so those are the highlight categories. The rest is a little bit less relevant. Mastery is a very cool feature. Basically, what it allows you to do is set up flashcards. So you can hide one word, or you can ask yourself a question, and then you have to give an answer. You should do that in your own head. And then you can reveal the highlight. That is the answer to that question. So it's a very nice example of trying to kind of go a little bit further in helping yourself memorize things using Readwise. I also set this up in the other video, so definitely check that out if you're interested in how this works. It's important to mention, though, that Readwise is a paid tool, so I pay a monthly subscription fee for this. For me, it's very much worth it to pay. It's giving me a lot of value, but it's important to know that this is not completely free. You can actually also broadcast your highlights. I've tried this. I don't really do it. I'm my only follower because I just wanted to see how it worked. Basically, you can share an email, for example, or a web page with your highlights with other people. It's quite a cool idea. And I think if you have a good audience and you are willing to invest time in that, it's a very nice way to keep them engaged. I personally don't use it, but I definitely see the relevancy there. Themed reviews is something I'm going to go through in a upcoming video. It's a new feature and I've been using it and well, trying it out rather, and I really, really like it. So I'm going to continue setting up themed reviews. I think it's an absolute recommendation, especially for the use case where you want to go into a particular topic or a theme in this case for, say, a few months. You know, it can be meditation you want to get better at, or because you're preparing for a Vipassana retreat, like a meditation retreat, or you want to learn a new programming language and you're learning about that. And you can set up themed reviews that are specific to those categories, and I'll walk through how those exactly work in another video. Another really, really cool thing I want to highlight is the amount of integrations. I've actually found some really good tools through this page. I didn't know about them. I checked out Readwise and I realized it was there. One of them is Airr. Airr is a tool that allows you to filter relevant content from like news websites and such on keywords that are interesting to you. It makes it a lot easier to navigate all the information that is sent to you, and you don't have to rely on newsletters anymore. I personally like it because I'm not an inbox zero person, so I do have a lot of emails unread in my mail, but I really have a lot of trouble following emails, and I'm missing a lot of emails simply because of the amount of irrelevant information that's being sent to my email. Naturally, it includes sales emails, but it also includes a lot of newsletters that I'm not interested in. So I try to always delegate these to Airr. For me, it's a great tool to filter out all the information and still get some relevancy in the information I consume, but also make sure that you consume a high variety of information, right? Because that's also valuable. So there's obviously a Kindle integration. So when you read books, you can sync your highlights. Instapaper is an extremely useful integration. So you can put articles in Instapaper and then highlight pieces of those articles, and then those highlights will be synced to Readwise. Supplemental books is very handy. You can add additional books. Apple Books is the same as Kindle. I also use it for like PDFs that I download and read. Could be very, very handy to use if you are a reader of papers and such, because you can't really put those in Kindle, and it will still allow you to sync highlights. Goodreads and Airr I covered already. Command I cover in the other video. I've actually started using it again. I mentioned in my other video that I had some concerns about the privacy. I do use it on my iPad currently because the features of Command are really, really, really useful. It's basically Instapaper integrated in a browser. So you'll browse the web and you can highlight things from your browser. I think the user experience is done very, very well, and it has a lot of value to offer, especially in the future, and especially if you're a personal knowledge management fan. It does a lot of things similar to Memex. It's a tool that's not listed here. The reason for that is that Memex integrates with Readwise in a slightly different way, but you can use it, and this is the website of Memex. I definitely recommend checking it out. I also mentioned it in my other video. I use this a lot. Basically, it allows you to highlight things from particular web pages without leaving the web page. So just from within your browser like this. With Instapaper, rather, you would have to save the whole article. There's a few quirks that make Memex and Instapaper kind of complementary. I wouldn't be able to swap one out for the other, but Memex definitely added a lot of value to my system. Now, I don't know a lot of the other tools. I've tried Pocket. I eventually settled for Instapaper, but that's because I also have Memex on the side. I've heard great things about Pocket from people that use it. I've experienced it myself. It's a very good product, so I definitely recommend checking it out and making your own decision in terms of what really works for you. Another nice thing to add here is that you can also send emails to Readwise to import the highlights from there, and you can also upload PDFs. It's been in beta a very long time. Honestly, I haven't found any trouble with it, so I think it's worth checking out. Now, this is the basic feature overview I can give you when it comes to Readwise. There's a lot of stuff you can configure naturally, and I think it's worth mentioning that if you are interested in this tool, check it out and play around with it, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do here. Of course, this whole video is created because of the Obsidian integration. If you're a Notion or a Roam user, you can actually also export them there. I have never used Evernote extensively. I don't know Mailbrew. It's definitely worth checking it out if it's a tool that you use. One last thing I want to mention is a really, really, really epic feature that I think is not mentioned nearly enough. I use it a lot, and that is when you read physical books, how do you get your highlights in? And the Readwise app actually has the ability to make a picture of your book, as they show here, and then select the text in the picture, and then add that as a highlight. And it really works. It works very well. In basically 90% of the cases, the text is perfect. Sometimes there's a few letters that miss here, but that actually is usually due to the fact that I haven't made the picture perfectly. This is, I think, a really killer feature. Yeah, there's a lot more interesting stuff to come from Readwise, so I definitely recommend you to check it out if you're interested in retaining information better. So I really hope that you found this review useful. It was a lot of fun to do, and I really enjoy using Readwise and Obsidian, so definitely check both tools out. And if you have any questions, please let us know, and don't forget to like and subscribe.